Hello everyone and welcome back to the Lowland Greenhouse here at Carlton Carnivores. I've got another species spotlight for you. Not an Indo-Chinese species of Nepenthes this time, but it is one of those odd outliers. This time we are actually going kind of to the opposite end of the range of the genus, to tropical northern Australia. Originally, Australia was thought to only have one native species, Nepenthes mirabilis, the very widespread and variable common species that is found through most of the genus's range, until people studied the populations in northern Australia a little closer and realized that there were actually several species that are probably all descended from mirabilis, but each of them has diverged into its own unique taxon. You have Nepenthes rowaniae on one end, which is a very wet, swamp-loving plant with really fat pitchers, and it rarely makes upper pitchers. Mirabilis, of course, still lives out there as well, which is kind of an intermediate between all these taxa. But then on the other end of the spectrum is a couple of species that tolerate it a little bit drier and are more apt to producing upper pitchers than lowers. One is Nepenthes parvula, a very recently described species close to this one that is considered one of the smallest in the genus. And then Nepenthes tenax, a kind of unique example of convergent evolution because it has a very similar growth habit to Nepenthes madagascariensis in both the way that it's able to hold up its own stem like this, as well as the upper pitcher habit of being on relatively short tendrils with bright red lids, very interesting funnel shape once they're fully mature uppers. So again, this is a species that is endemic to tropical northern Australia, specifically in the flooded kind of monsoonal plains of the Cape York Peninsula. Actually, the Steve Irwin Preserve is one of the places where some of the biggest populations of these exist, so kind of special in that way. These guys, they average, stems will usually grow up to about 3.5 feet tall, and for most of that, they can actually stand upright. They will support themselves growing up to that tall. If you get a plant that grows a little bit taller than that, they do eventually fall over, but there's usually grasses and such that they then support themselves on around them, but they have a very, very rigid, sturdy stem that allows them to stick straight up, growing up over the grasses to get the full sun out there in the savannas where they live. And they live in areas that are generally always wet in some manner. These guys tolerate it a little bit drier because they do live in more of the sandy open spaces than the actual wet canals where Rowanii really likes to live, but they're relatively tolerant of kind of a variety of conditions, and you'll see vast hybrid swarms between all of the taxa out there where they contact each other because they are all fairly tolerant of similar conditions. As they grow, they produce these leaves, which are a very kind of linear lanceolate in shape. They have a very slight indumentum on them, very fine white hairs that cover most of the plant, and generally they, especially along the margins of the leaves and along the stem, those hairs stick around, so that's always present on the plant. One unique thing about the leaves of these guys, kind of similar to some of the Indo-Chinese species like Thorellii, or also seen in Madagascariensis, is as they grow, they don't fold out flat. Rather, instead, they actually kind of form this odd V shape, and that may actually help with the stability of the plant. It helps keeps the leaves more erect. It holds the pitchers better on the end. So it's got a V-shaped profile if you were to cut through the leaf. So either of the sides actually sticks upward from the midrib. Lower pitchers are produced for a relatively short period of time on this plant. They are relatively small, around maybe 3 inches tall. They look like mirabilis. They're very simple, they're very plain, kind of distinctive veins can usually be seen on those pitchers, and then they have a couple of small wings that run right down the front of the pitcher. After starting to mature, and it happens fairly quickly, this is still a young plant, but it's starting to hit that stage where it's producing, it's getting close to producing true uppers. you see the structure not only of the pitchers, but of course also how they're held off of the tendrils changes. Lower pitchers, they will hang down, and oftentimes they'll kind of sit on the soil surface, and they have slightly longer tendrils. As they transition to uppers, though, they get these very short tendrils that come just off the tip of the leaf, and then the pitchers hang immediately off that and hang straight up and develop a very narrow funnel shape to them, often kind of laterally compressed. So if you view it from the side, the pitcher is actually wider than when you view it from the front or from the back. So the bottom, approximately the bottom quarter, is always absolutely funnel shaped, infundibular, and then above that it either can remain funnel shaped, or you can get a very slight hip and then it turns cylindrical above that. The wings kind of disappear on this species, and then it goes up to the round mouth, this very broad rounded lid, and usually the exterior of the pitchers, both the lowers and the uppers, you can have a little bit of red coloration in some of them, but oftentimes they are very green or yellowish. The interior, including the underside of the lid and inside the pitcher, are very heavily red or red mottled. So it creates a very high contrast that attracts insects. These guys, again, they grow to about a meter tall, 3.5 feet, and they flower at about that stage. Those flowers can be a couple of feet taller than the plant as well, so that it attracts the attention of the insects around there and keeps those flowers away from the traps too, so that they're not eating their own pollinators. Granted, the pitchers and the flowers tend to attract different things because they look and they smell very different. A lot of Nepenthes flowers are kind of very fungal or odd smelling to attract like beetles and moths and gnats, while the pitchers attract flying insects like flies and bees and butterflies and things like that. So, very uniquely structured species. It's not common in cultivation still, and I'm not entirely sure why. Same with like Roanii. That's a species I'm still looking for, and I can't find anyone who has it for sale. But all of the northern Australian species, they're relatively easy to keep as long as you have hot and humid. If you can grow Mirabilis or Rafflesiana or Bicalcarata, you can probably grow these guys. Temperatures between 75 and 95 degrees Fahrenheit. These guys, as long as you acclimate them correctly, again, in the wild, they are growing in blazing full sun, so they can take very, very strong light. They can come to tolerate a little bit lower light, but if you want the good structure, the upright stem that supports itself, you need to give them lots of strong lighting. And then humidity kind of varies. Again, they have much tougher leaves than Mirabilis, so they will tolerate lower humidity. And in the wild, that will fluctuate greatly. During the wet season, it's extremely humid, 98, 99%, 100% of course if it's actually raining. During the dry season, you might see that drop down to 30 or 40% humidity. So these guys can tolerate a bit of a range as long as you give them time to acclimate to it. And then for soil, in the wild, again, they are growing in sand plains. So if you want to grow it in a sandy, very sandy peat mix, they will tolerate that. But also, I grow them in my standard Nepenthes mix, roughly 1 to 1 to 1 sphagnum, perlite, and then right now I'm using cocoa chips for another kind of aerating material. Keeping it just damp is often best. They can tolerate flooded for a little bit, but if you keep them that way, you may risk the roots rotting since they don't have the means of washing out anaerobic conditions in pots like they do in the wild. So keeping it just damp, and then even allowing the tops of the soil to actually dry out between waterings is fine for these guys. They will tolerate that as well. Now, as they grow, one reason why they might not be too common in cultivation is they don't generally tend to produce a lot of shoots quickly, like side shoots and basils and such. So as they grow up, you get that nice tall stem, and it'll just kind of stay like that for a while. If you cut that, of course, it will make shoots off to either side, and then they root just like Mirabilis will. Stick it in some water, keep it warm, and you'll see new roots sprout. But to get basils, oftentimes you have to wait for the plant to get fairly large and then start to fall over on its own, at which point the hormones coming from the top of the stem no longer flow as easily down to the base, and that will trigger the basils to start sprouting. They may not produce very many at a time. So this is still a species that commands quite a price in cultivation and is just not commonly seen. But hopefully, once we get these guys growing really well, they'll get going. You can see here, this is not a huge plant, and this is actually, I just repotted it, and this is triple the soil volume that it had before. So it's not a species that takes up a lot of space either. A lot of people, I will tell you, you can't grow Nepenthes for very long in like terrariums or enclosed spaces because they're tropical lianas. They get huge. This is a species that is not going to get huge, not very quickly. The leaves might get to 6-8 inches long, so you have a plant that's about 14 inches wide. And again, for a while, it's going to keep a stem that's only a couple of feet tall, so you might be able to maintain this in a terrarium, so long as you don't have the conditions remain too stagnant and you can give them the bright light that they need. So a species to look into if you can find it available. But that is about all that I have for that species right now. I do have a few more species that I'm going to be working on repotting up soon, and I'll do videos on those as I do that. So this little species spotlight for Nepenthes will probably be continuing for the next couple of months on the channel. But until then, if you enjoy educational videos like this, learning about new species and such, or if you like the wildlife adventure videos that I post on for education, make sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on the black bell so you don't miss anything coming up. Leave likes on the videos, watch them all the way through, because of all things, those watch hours are really important for channel growth. Leave comments, questions if you have them below the videos here. If you'd like to find out more information, I have the website, database, and blog with animal and plant info there at carltoncarnivores.com. And I'm always posting photos and little video tidbits on social media, Instagram and Facebook, sometimes TikTok. If you would like to help support in a more financial manner, because the trips that I take, raising these plants, taking the time to edit these videos does cost a lot. Consider joining as a patron at patreon.com/hcarlton. Members there do get early access to the videos, access to the monthly seed contest that I do. I often have a lot of things that I don't offer on my website that I will give to patrons instead. Or you can also do one-time donations. Sometimes Patreon allows that, or you can do that through Coffee. We also have our Teespring shop, merch, and of course the plants and sometimes baby snakes if you're looking for pets. I will sell at my website, carltoncarnivores.com. Links for all these things will be in the video description below, including the master link tree where you can find everything, so don't worry about memorizing anything. But until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.